I'm Haley, 29 years old, from Boston. For 5 years, I paid my parents' mortgage, utilities, and most of their expenses. I never complained because family helps family. Then one day, after asking my mom to help clean up, she exploded, "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." So I did. 3 weeks later, my dad texted, "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" That's when I realized what I truly meant to them. If you're watching this right now, let me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever bent over backward for family only to be called ungrateful. Now let me tell you what happened when I finally stood up for myself. Growing up, we were a typical middle-class family living in the suburbs of Boston. My father, Michael, worked at an automotive manufacturing plant, while my mother, Karen, had a part-time job as a receptionist at a doctor's office. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough to get by comfortably. I have fond memories of family vacations to Cape Cod weekend barbecues in our backyard, and my parents attending every one of my school events. Everything changed when I was 16. The automotive plant where my dad had worked for almost 20 years shut down, relocating production overseas. Hundreds of workers, including my father, lost their jobs. I still remember the day he came home early, his face pale and drawn to tell us the news. He tried to put on a brave face, assuring us that he would find another job quickly. But finding comparable employment proved much harder than any of us anticipated. My father was in his late 40s by then, with specialized skills that didn't easily transfer to other industries. The economy was also going through a rough patch, with many businesses cutting back rather than hiring. For months, he sent out applications and went to interviews only to be told he was either overqualified or underqualified for the positions available. My mother's part-time receptionist job suddenly became our primary source of income. She increased her hours as much as possible, but it wasn't enough to cover our mortgage, car payments, insurance, and daily expenses. I watched as my parents' stress levels rose with each passing month. They would have hushed arguments late at night when they thought I was asleep, their voices tight with worry about how to make ends meet. I decided to help in whatever way I could. At 16, I got my first job at a local grocery store, working after school and on weekends. My initial plan was to save for college, but seeing my parents struggle, I started contributing most of my earnings to household expenses. It wasn't much, but it helped put food on the table and kept the lights on. Despite our financial difficulties, my parents insisted that I focus on my education. "Your future is the most important investment," my dad would say. I worked hard in school and was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship to attend a state university right in Boston. The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses or books. To save money, I lived at home and continued working part-time throughout college. Those 4 years were exhausting. I balanced a full course load in graphic design with 20 to 30 hours of work each week. While my classmates were enjoying the full college experience, I was rushing from classes to work shifts, then coming home to help around the house. But I never complained. This was what family did for each other, I believed. My dedication paid off when I graduated with honors and landed a job at a growing marketing firm in downtown Boston. The starting salary was more than either of my parents had ever made. I still remember the pride in my father's eyes at my graduation, mixed with a sadness that I recognized as shame that he couldn't provide more for our family. The logical next step would have been to get my own apartment to start building my independent adult life. Many of my colleagues and friends were doing exactly that, enjoying their first taste of true independence. But when I looked at my parents' situation, I couldn't bring myself to leave. My father had found work as a night security guard, but the pay was a fraction of what he had earned before. My mother was still at the same receptionist job with minimal increases in her hourly rate over the years. Their financial situation remained precarious, with more month left at the end of their money. The mortgage was several months behind, and they were at risk of foreclosure. So I made what seemed like the only choice at the time. I stayed home, and started using my new income to catch up on their mortgage and outstanding bills. It's just temporary, I told myself, until they get back on their feet. But temporary turned into permanent. Within the first year of my employment, I had taken over the mortgage payments entirely. I was also covering the utilities, groceries, and most other household expenses. My parents were grateful at first, expressing their appreciation and promising that things would turn around soon. My father would talk about job prospects that never materialized, and my mother would make my favorite meals as a thank you. As the months turned into years, however, something subtle began to change in our family dynamic. The gratitude became less frequent, replaced by expectation. If I was late with the mortgage payment because of an issue with my own finances, my parents would become anxious and irritable. If I suggested that perhaps they could cover the electric bill that month, my mother would remind me of all the sacrifices they had made for me growing up. The power balance in our household had shifted, but not in a way that felt healthy. I had become the primary breadwinner. But instead of this earning me more respect or autonomy, it seemed to create resentment, particularly from my mother. The more financially dependent they became on me, the more my mother asserted control in other ways as if to compensate. She would question my work hours, criticize my few social outings, and make passive-aggressive comments about my choices, from the clothes I wore to the friends I kept. My father, always the more passive of the two, would stay quiet during these interactions, occasionally throwing me an apologetic glance, but never intervening. I started to feel less like a daughter and more like a tenant who was expected to pay the bills but still follow house rules designed for a teenager. I was approaching 30, but was being treated as if I had no right to an adult life of my own. Still, I told myself that this was a small price to pay for keeping my family stable. After all, what kind of daughter would I be if I abandoned them to financial ruin just so I could have my own space? In retrospect, I realize I had fallen into a classic pattern of enabling. By solving all their financial problems, I was preventing my parents from making necessary changes or taking responsibility for their situation. But at the time, I couldn't see another option. Family helps family. That was what I had always been taught, and I was determined to live by that principle, even as it slowly drained me of my independence, my social life, and increasingly, my sense of self-worth. The day everything changed started like many others. I had been working overtime for 2 weeks straight on a major campaign for a new client. Our team was under immense pressure to deliver exceptional work, as this client could potentially bring in millions in revenue for our firm. I had been leaving the house before 7 each morning, and often not returning until 9 or 10 at night. That particular day, I had finally submitted the completed project after a grueling 14-hour workday. My boss was thrilled with the results and had given the entire team the next day off as a thank you. I was exhausted but satisfied as I drove home, looking forward to a long shower and collapsing into bed. When I walked through the front door around 10:30 that night, I was immediately struck by the state of the house. Dishes were piled in the sink, laundry was scattered across the living room furniture, and there were food containers and magazines strewn about the coffee table. My mother was sitting on the couch watching a reality TV show, while my father was presumably already in bed for his night shift. Under normal circumstances, I might have just ignored the mess and gone straight to bed. But after 2 weeks of stress and minimal sleep, seeing the chaotic state of the home I was financially supporting pushed me over the edge. Not in an angry way, but in a weary, exasperated way that just needed a small acknowledgement of support. "Mom," I said, setting down my laptop bag. "I've had a really long day. Would you mind helping clean up a bit? I just need to shower and get some sleep." My mother glanced up from her show with an expression that immediately made my stomach tighten. It was a look I had become all too familiar with over the years, a mixture of indignation and defensiveness. I've been busy today, she replied, gesturing vaguely. Besides, you're barely ever home anymore. Always at that job of yours, or out with whoever. The out with whoever comment was particularly unfair. I had sacrificed most of my social life over the past 5 years. The few friends I still maintained regular contact with often commented on how rarely I was available to meet up. Dating was practically non-existent, as most men understandably lost interest when I consistently prioritized family obligations over building a relationship. Mom, I'm always at that job because that job pays for this house, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I'm not asking you to clean everything. I'm just asking for some help because I'm exhausted. She muted the TV and turned to face me fully, her expression hardening. So now you're keeping score, throwing it in our faces that you help out financially? Your father and I raised you for 18 years, put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. Did we ever ask for anything in return? This isn't about keeping score, I replied, feeling a familiar sense of frustration rising. It's about mutual respect. I work hard to support us, and I'm just asking for a little consideration when I'm particularly tired. Consideration? She scoffed. You want to talk about consideration? How about the consideration of spending some actual time with your parents instead of acting like living here is some huge burden? We're not some charity case, Haley. The conversation was following a familiar script that never led anywhere productive. But this time, something in me refused to back down and apologize as I usually did. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or perhaps it was years of suppressed frustration, finally reaching a breaking point. I never said you were a charity case, I said firmly. But I have put my entire life on hold for 5 years to help support this family. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, most of the groceries. I haven't taken a vacation, I barely see my friends. I haven't had a real relationship because any free time I have goes to helping around here. All I'm asking for is a little help when I'm clearly running on empty. My mother stood up abruptly, her face flushing with anger. You think you're better than us now because you have that fancy job downtown? Let me tell you something. Miss High and Mighty, we were doing just fine before you started helping us. This was so patently untrue that I almost laughed. They had been months away from foreclosure when I stepped in. But before I could point this out, my mother continued, her voice rising to a shout. You're ungrateful. If living here and helping your family is such a burden, then get out. Get out and never come back. The words echoed in the suddenly silent room. From down the hall, I heard movement, and my father appeared in the doorway looking confused and concerned. He had clearly been woken by the shouting. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. My mother turned to him, gesturing wildly in my direction. Your daughter thinks she's too good for us now. She's throwing it in our faces that she helps with the bills. I looked to my father, hoping he might defend me, or at least acknowledge the unfairness of my mother's characterization. But as had been the pattern for years, he simply looked uncomfortable and said nothing substantive. Haley, your mother has had a long day too, he offered weakly. And in that moment, something crystallized for me. This wasn't a temporary situation that would improve. This was the dynamic now, and it would continue as long as I allowed it. I had become an ATM machine with no right to express needs or boundaries. I could have argued further. I could have pointed out all the ways my mother's accusation was unfair and untrue. I could have reminded them of the financial reality they would face without my support. But suddenly, I was too tired for any of it. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, what? My mother demanded, clearly expecting more of a fight. Okay, I'll leave, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside me. If that's what you want, I'll go. A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mother's face, quickly replaced by stubborn pride. Fine. If that's your attitude, then maybe you should. My father looked alarmed now. Let's all calm down, he suggested. It's late, everyone's tired. We can talk about this in the morning. But I was already heading to my room. With mechanical efficiency, I began packing a suitcase with essential clothes, toiletries, and important documents. I grabbed my laptop chargers and a few sentimental items that I couldn't bear to leave behind. The rest, I decided, could wait. My parents followed me, their expressions shifting from anger to disbelief as they realized I was actually leaving. Haley, don't be ridiculous. My mother said, her tone softer now, but still lacking any real apology. You don't need to leave. I was just upset. No, Mom, I replied, zipping up my suitcase. You were right. I need to get out. This isn't working anymore. My father placed a hand on my arm. Where will you go? It's almost midnight. I'll figure it out, I said gently, removing his hand. As I walked toward the front door with my hastily packed belongings, I saw the genuine shock on their faces. They had never expected me to actually leave. In all our previous arguments, I had always been the one to apologize first to smooth things over to put their needs before my own. But not this time. Without another word, I walked out the door and got into my car. As I drove away from the house I had kept from foreclosure, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. There was hurt, certainly, and anger. But underneath those expected feelings was something unexpected relief. For the first time in 5 years, I was putting myself first. And despite the uncertainty ahead, it felt like I could finally breathe again. I drove aimlessly for about 20 minutes, the reality of my situation slowly sinking in. It was nearly midnight. I had nowhere to go, and despite my good salary, I had limited savings. Most of my income had gone towards supporting my parents with only a small portion set aside for emergencies. This certainly qualified as an emergency, but I was reluctant to deplete those funds for temporary housing when I knew I would need them for securing a permanent living situation. Finally, I called Jessica, my best friend since college, and one of the few relationships I had managed to maintain despite my limited social life. Jessica had always been vocal about her concerns regarding my financial support of my parents, but she had respected my decisions even when she disagreed with them. Haley, is everything okay? She answered, clearly concerned about the late-hour call. Not really, I admitted, then explained the situation as succinctly as possible. Without hesitation, Jessica offered her spare bedroom. Come over right now, she insisted. You can stay as long as you need to. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on Jessica's couch with a cup of tea recounting the details of the argument. As I spoke, the emotional walls I had maintained during the confrontation began to crumble. By the time I finished explaining, tears were streaming down my face. I just don't understand, I said, wiping at my cheeks. After everything I've done, how could she call me ungrateful? How could she tell me to leave like that? And why didn't my dad say anything? Jessica listened patiently, then took my hands in hers. Honey, I'm going to say something that might be hard to hear. What happened tonight? It's been building for years. Your parents stopped seeing you as their daughter and started seeing you as their financial support system. When you asked for something in return, even something as small as help with housework, it threatened that system. But they're my parents, I protested weakly. Family is supposed to help each other. Help is supposed to go both ways, Jessica pointed out gently. And it's supposed to be appreciated, not expected. You've been enabling them, Haley. They have no incentive to improve their situation because you're solving all their problems for them. Deep down, I knew she was right. I had sensed the unhealthy dynamic for years, but had pushed those concerns aside out of a misplaced sense of duty. Now forced out of that situation, I could see it more clearly. That first night at Jessica's, I cried myself to sleep mourning not just the immediate rupture, but the years of one-sided sacrifice that had led to it. But when I woke the next morning, alongside the grief was a tiny seedling of possibility. For the first time in 5 years, my decisions affected only me. My time, my money, my energy were my own to direct as I saw fit. I took the day off that my boss had offered and spent it processing my emotions and making practical plans. The first priority was finding a place to live. I reached out to a real estate agent and explained my situation, emphasizing that I needed something available quickly. To my surprise, I qualified for a much nicer apartment than I had expected. Without my parents' expenses draining my income, my financial situation looked quite healthy on paper. 3 days after leaving my parents' house, I signed a lease on a small but charming one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had always admired but assumed I couldn't afford. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. I bought essential furniture, set up utilities in my name, and began the process of creating a home that was truly mine. Jessica helped me shop for household items, laughing at my indecision over seemingly simple choices like bath towels and coffee mugs. "You've never had to think about these things before, have you?" she observed as I stood paralyzed in the kitchenware aisle of a department store. "I guess not," I admitted. At home, everything was already established. I never had to decide what kind of dish soap I preferred or what color sheets I wanted. These small decisions were simultaneously overwhelming and exhilarating. Each choice, from the brand of toothpaste in my bathroom to the arrangement of furniture in my living room, was an exercise in discovering my own preferences untethered from anyone else's expectations. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of my new independence was the financial revelation. When I sat down to create my first solo budget, I was shocked by how much money I actually had when I wasn't supporting 3 adults. Even after accounting for my new rent and utilities, I had more disposable income than I had ever experienced before. I could save for retirement, build an emergency fund, and still have money left for small luxuries like dining out occasionally or buying new clothes without guilt. The first time I bought myself a nice dress just because I liked it, I felt almost guilty. Then I realized that this guilt was a residue of years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. I made a conscious decision to work on releasing that guilt and embracing the idea that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Throughout these first 2 weeks, my phone remained conspicuously silent. No calls or texts from either of my parents. I vacillated between hurt that they hadn't checked to see if I was safe and relief that I didn't have to deal with the emotional fallout just yet. I knew a reckoning would come eventually, but for now, I was grateful for the space to establish my new life without their influence. Jessica observed these changes in me with approval. "You're standing taller," she told me one evening as we assembled a bookshelf for my new place. "Your voice is different too, more confident." I hadn't noticed these changes myself, but when I thought about it, I did feel different. The constant background anxiety of managing my parents' expectations had lifted, leaving room for me to discover who I was when I wasn't defined by caretaking. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with, saying yes to social invitations I would have previously declined due to family obligations. I joined a yoga class that met twice a week, something I had wanted to try for years but never found the time for. I even created a profile on a dating app, tentatively opening myself to the possibility of romantic connection. These changes weren't without pangs of guilt and worry. Late at night, I would sometimes find myself wondering how my parents were managing, whether they had figured out how to pay the bills without my contribution. But each time these thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself that they were adults who had managed their lives before I stepped in, and they would need to learn to do so again. What I didn't know was that this period of peaceful independence was about to be disrupted in a way that would force me to confront the full reality of my family's dysfunction. Exactly 3 weeks after I left home, I received a text message from my father. No, how are you? Or, are you safe? Just 5 blunt words. Why haven't you paid the mortgage? I stared at the message in disbelief. After 3 weeks of silence with no attempt to apologize or check on my well-being, their first communication was a demand about money. It confirmed what I had been trying not to believe, that my primary value to them had become financial. I took several deep breaths before responding, carefully considering my words. Finally, I typed, "Oh, I thought I wasn't welcome anymore." Did Mom change her mind? The response was immediate and angry. "This isn't a joke, Haley. The mortgage is past due and they're threatening to start foreclosure proceedings. We need that money now." I felt a surge of indignation. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened, no recognition of how hurtful my mother's words had been, no appreciation for the years I had faithfully paid their bills. Just an entitled demand that I continue my financial support, despite being told to leave and never come back. "I'm sorry you're in a difficult position," I replied. "But I'm no longer living there, and I have my own expenses now. I need some time to think about our relationship moving forward." What followed was a barrage of increasingly desperate and guilt-inducing messages. My father switched between angry demands, appeals to my sense of family duty, and descriptions of their dire financial straits. My mother, apparently watching over his shoulder, soon joined in from her own phone. Her texts oscillating between thinly veiled accusations and manipulative apologies. "I didn't mean what I said that night. You know how I get when I'm upset. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. We're going to lose the house. Is that what you want? We're your parents, Haley. Family helps family." That last one hit particularly hard, as it was the very principle I had lived by for years to my own detriment. But now I could see that in my family, helping was expected to flow in only one direction. When I didn't immediately capitulate, the tactics escalated. My phone began ringing with calls from relatives I rarely spoke with. My aunt on my mother's side called to tell me how disappointed she was in my abandonment of my parents. My father's brother left a voicemail asking what kind of daughter leaves her family in financial ruin. Even my grandmother, who lived in a retirement community in Florida, and whom I spoke to maybe twice a year, called to express her dismay at my selfish behavior. It became clear that my parents had been reaching out to the extended family, presenting a version of events that cast them as victims and me as the ungrateful child who had suddenly cut them off without cause. None of these relatives seemed aware of the years I had spent supporting my parents financially, nor of the circumstances that had led to my departure. At first, I tried to explain my side to these family members, but I quickly realized that most had already made up their minds based on my parents' narrative. After a few frustrating conversations, I began letting calls go to voicemail and responding to texts with brief, non-committal messages. The pressure was intense, and there were moments when I considered giving in, paying the mortgage one more time to stop the barrage of guilt and accusations. Jessica became my rock during this period, reminding me that giving in now would only reset the cycle of enabling behavior that had led to this situation. "They need to feel the consequences of their actions," she insisted when I showed her the latest series of texts from my father. "Otherwise, nothing will change." A week into this onslaught, I received the most revealing message yet. My father, apparently in a moment of particular stress or honesty, sent a text that read, "We had no idea you were actually paying attention to how much you were spending on us. We thought you were just helping out a little, not keeping track of every penny." This was stunning to me. I had been transparent about my financial contributions from the beginning, showing them exactly how much I was covering each month. They had known precisely how much I was helping out, and had actively relied on that amount. This message suggested either a level of willful ignorance that was hard to comprehend, or a deliberate attempt to minimize my contributions in their own minds to avoid feeling dependent. Another message followed shortly after. Besides, we've been using the extra money to finally enjoy some of the things we've been denied for years. Is that so wrong? Don't we deserve some happiness after working hard our whole lives? And there it was. While I had been scrimping and saving, postponing my own life milestones to keep them afloat, they had been using their freed-up income for discretionary spending rather than building any kind of financial safety net. The extra money that my support had provided hadn't gone toward creating long-term stability, but had instead funded lifestyle choices that they apparently felt entitled to. This revelation strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to continue enabling a situation where my sacrifice was taken for granted and used to fund choices that perpetuated their financial instability. But I also recognized that simply cutting them off without any transition plan was perhaps unnecessarily harsh. After careful consideration, I responded with a firm but not unkind message. I understand you're in a difficult position and I'm willing to discuss a transition plan. But first, we need to have an honest conversation about our relationship and expectations moving forward. I suggest meeting somewhere neutral to talk things through. My father's response was non-committal, suggesting he would think about it and discuss it with my mother. I took this as a positive sign that at least some communication channel remained open. What I didn't anticipate was that they would take matters into their own hands in a much more direct way. 3 days after my offer to discuss a transition plan, I returned home from work to find my parents sitting in their car outside my apartment building. My stomach dropped at the sight of them. I hadn't told them my new address, which meant they had probably gotten it from Jessica, the only person who knew where I was living. For a moment, I considered driving past and coming back later, avoiding the confrontation entirely. But I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Taking a deep breath, I parked my car and approached theirs. My mother rolled down the window, her expression a carefully crafted mask of maternal concern. "Haley, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you." The words rang hollow after weeks of silence followed by financial demands with no inquiry about my well-being. But I kept my expression neutral. "How did you find my address?" "Jessica told us," my father confirmed from the driver's seat. "We were concerned when you wouldn't answer our calls." "Can we come up and talk?" I hesitated, weighing my options. Having this conversation in a public parking lot seemed inappropriate, but inviting them into my new sanctuary felt like a boundary violation. Still, if we were ever going to resolve this situation, we needed to talk face to face. "Okay," I agreed reluctantly. "We can talk in my apartment, but I don't have much time." This wasn't true, but it gave me an exit strategy if things became too intense. Leading my parents up to my new apartment was surreal. As we entered, I saw them taking in the space, their eyes lingering on the new furniture and decorations I had chosen. My mother's expression was hard to read, a mixture of curiosity and what might have been hurt. "This is nice," she said, her tone suggesting surprise that I could create a pleasant living environment without her input. "Thank you," I replied simply, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa while I took the armchair opposite. "So, what did you want to discuss?" My mother launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about family loyalty and mutual support, punctuated with subtle guilt trips about my sudden departure and how difficult things had been for them since I left. She never directly apologized for telling me to leave, instead framing it as a misunderstanding that I had taken too seriously. "We thought you understood that it was just words spoken in anger," she explained, her voice taking on a wounded quality. "We never expected you to actually leave." "You told me to get out and never come back," I reminded her calmly. "Those are pretty clear words." "But families argue all the time," she countered. "You say things you don't mean. That's normal. What's not normal is abandoning your parents because of one little fight." My father, who had been quiet until then, leaned forward. Haley, the truth is, we're in serious financial trouble. The mortgage is 2 weeks overdue now, and we don't have the money to pay it. Your mother's hours were cut back at work, and my job barely covers the utilities and groceries. I understand you're in a difficult position, I acknowledged. But I'm curious why after 5 years of me covering most of your expenses, you don't have any savings to fall back on. Where did the money go that you weren't spending on the mortgage or utilities? My question hung in the air, creating a palpable tension. My parents exchanged glances, neither seeming eager to answer. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice defensive. We deserve to enjoy life a little after all the hardship we went through. Is that so wrong? Your father lost his career. We almost lost our home. We needed some happiness. So, while I was putting my life on hold to keep you financially stable, you were using that opportunity to take vacations, buy luxury items. The pieces were falling into place now, explaining their resistance to financial transparency over the years. Don't make it sound so selfish. My mother snapped, her conciliatory tone evaporating. After everything we sacrificed to raise you, we were entitled to some comfort. Something inside me broke at that moment, a dam holding back years of unexpressed frustration and hurt. Entitled. You think you were entitled to my money without any accountability? Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? 5 years of my life, Mom. 5 years where I could have been saving for my own future, building my own home, maybe even starting my own family. Instead, I gave everything to you, and you couldn't even acknowledge it. Worse, you called me ungrateful and kicked me out when I asked for the smallest bit of help in return. My voice had risen despite my best efforts to remain calm. My mother's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. So that's how you see it, as some great sacrifice on your part. Let me remind you of all the sacrifices we made for you. 21 years of putting your needs first, of working jobs. We hated to give you opportunities of going without, so you could have what you needed. We did our duty as parents. Was it too much to ask that you do yours as a daughter? My duty was to become a self-sufficient adult, which I did. Supporting you financially for the rest of your lives was never part of that duty. I helped because I wanted to, because I love you, but that doesn't mean I signed up for a lifetime of one-sided giving, with no appreciation. My father, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the escalating tension, tried to intervene. Haley, your mother doesn't mean to sound ungrateful. We do appreciate everything you've done, but we're in a real bind here, and we need your help. Maybe we can work out some arrangement that feels fair to everyone. I turned to him, feeling a fresh wave of disappointment. Dad, this isn't just about money. It's about respect and boundaries. For years, I've felt like an ATM machine rather than a daughter. Mom criticizes my choices, makes me feel guilty for having any life outside of helping you both, and then has the audacity to call me ungrateful when I ask for some consideration in return. My mother stood up abruptly. I can see this was a mistake. You've clearly made up your mind to abandon us. I hope you can live with yourself when we lose our home. As she headed for the door, I called after her. Mom, I never said I wouldn't help at all. I said we needed to establish some boundaries and expectations, but you're not even willing to have that conversation. She paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. There's nothing to discuss. Either you help your family or you don't. And you've made your choice clear. With that, she walked out, leaving my father and me in an awkward silence. He looked torn, glancing between me and the door through which my mother had just exited. I should go after her, he said, but made no immediate move to leave. Before you go, Dad, I said, seizing the moment of relative privacy. I need to ask you something. Did you and Mom ever have a plan for your finances that didn't involve me supporting you indefinitely? Did you ever try to improve your situation over the past 5 years? My father's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw him as he truly was, not the strong protective figure of my childhood, but a man who had been beaten down by circumstances and had taken the path of least resistance. "We kept thinking things would get better," he admitted. "I'd find a better job or your mother would get a raise. But then time passed, and it was easier to just rely on your help." "And the money you saved by not paying the mortgage and utilities, where did that go?" I pressed. He hesitated, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Your mother, she's always had expensive tastes. After losing so much, having some nice things made her feel better. Restaurant meals, designer clothes, weekend trips. It added up. I knew we should have been saving, but it was easier to go along with what she wanted than to argue." I felt a complex mixture of emotions, anger at the careless way they had treated my financial support, sympathy for my father's obvious shame, and a profound sadness for the broken family dynamic we had created together. "Dad, did you ever consider what all this was costing me? Not just financially, but emotionally. The stress of supporting 3 adults on one income, the constant criticism from Mom, the feeling that I could never do enough." His eyes filled with tears, a sight so rare that it momentarily stunned me. "I should have protected you better," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From financial burden, yes, but also from your mother's expectations. I've failed you as a father, and I'm sorry." His sincerity caught me off guard. This was perhaps the first genuine acknowledgement from either parent of the toll their dependence had taken on me. "I don't want to cut you off completely," I told him, softening my tone. "But I can't go back to the way things were. If I'm going to help at all, there need to be conditions. Real changes." He nodded slowly. "What kind of changes?" "Financial transparency. A budget that you and Mom actually stick to. Efforts to increase your own income. And most importantly, respect for my boundaries and my separate life." "Your mother won't like those conditions," he said, but there was a resignation in his voice that suggested he knew they were reasonable. "I know," I acknowledged, "but they're non-negotiable. I love you both, but I can't keep enabling a situation that's unhealthy for all of us." My father stood up, looking older than his years. "I'll talk to her when she calms down. Maybe we can meet again somewhere neutral and try to work this out." As he left to join my mother in the car, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. The conversation had been painful but necessary. For perhaps the first time, some of the hard truths about our family dynamic had been spoken aloud. Whether that would lead to meaningful change remained to be seen, but it was a start. A week passed before I heard from my parents again. During that time, I found myself oscillating between guilt about their financial situation and resolve to maintain the boundaries I had finally established. Jessica and other friends reinforced that I was doing the right thing, but it was still difficult to imagine my parents potentially losing their home. Finally, my father called and suggested meeting at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and their house. He sounded tired but more composed than during our last interaction. "Your mother has agreed to talk," he said. "No shouting, no accusations. Just a conversation about moving forward." I agreed cautiously, setting a time for the following Saturday morning. In preparation for the meeting, I consulted with a financial advisor explaining the situation and asking for suggestions on how to create a sustainable transition plan. I wanted to come prepared with concrete options rather than vague promises. When Saturday arrived, I arrived at the coffee shop first, selecting a table in a quiet corner that would afford us some privacy. I had dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that conveyed professionalism and seriousness, rather than the casual clothes I typically wore around my parents. This was a negotiation, not a family chat, and I wanted the visual cues to reinforce that distinction. My parents arrived together, my mother's expression guarded but not immediately hostile, which I took as a positive sign. After ordering coffees, we sat in awkward silence for a moment, before my father cleared his throat. Haley, your mother and I have discussed the situation and we understand that things need to change. We're open to hearing your thoughts on how we might move forward. I nodded, appreciating his neutral tone. Thank you for meeting with me. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've even consulted with a financial advisor to come up with some options that might work for everyone. I pulled out a folder containing the materials I had prepared a breakdown of their monthly expenses based on my previous contributions, several budget scenarios that accounted for their actual income and information on resources for financial counseling and job placement services. First, I began, I want to be clear that I do care about you both, and I don't want to see you lose your home. But I also can't continue the arrangement we had before, where I was covering most of your expenses with no end in sight. My mother shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent, which I took as permission to continue. Based on what I know about your income and expenses, there are several paths forward, I explained, sliding the budget scenarios across the table. Option 1 involves you significantly reducing your expenses to match your current income. That would mean downsizing to a smaller home, selling one of the cars, and cutting back on non-essential spending. My mother's expression tightened, but she still didn't interrupt. Option 2 involves increasing your income to match your current expenses. Dad, there are job placement services specifically for workers displaced from manufacturing jobs that might help you find something better paying than the night security position. Mom, there are opportunities for receptionist work that pay better than your current job, or you could consider training for a different role altogether. My father was reviewing the budget scenarios with apparent interest, while my mother's gaze remained fixed on her coffee cup. Option 3 is a combination approach with some expense reduction and some income increase, plus a temporary contribution from me during the transition period. This last option finally drew my mother's attention. What do you mean by temporary? She asked. I'm willing to help with the mortgage for the next 6 months, I explained. That would give you time to either find better jobs or prepare to downsize, but there would be conditions. What kind of conditions? My mother's tone was wary. Financial transparency. I would need to see bank statements and bills to ensure that the money is going where it's supposed to go. A strict budget that you both agree to follow. Regular check-ins to review progress towards self-sufficiency. And counseling, both financial counseling and possibly family therapy, to address some of the unhealthy patterns in our relationship. My mother's immediate reaction was predictably defensive. So, we'd be treated like children who can't be trusted with their allowance, having to report to you about how we spend our money. No, I corrected firmly. You'd be treated like adults who are receiving financial assistance with clear expectations attached. This isn't about control, Mom. It's about accountability. My father placed a gentle hand on my mother's arm. Karen, Haley's offering us a fair deal. 6 months of help is generous considering everything that's happened. My mother pulled her arm away, but her expression softened slightly. And what happens after 6 months? You just cut us off completely. After 6 months, we reevaluate, I explained. If you've made significant progress toward financial independence but still need some support, we can discuss continuing help at a reduced level. If you haven't made any effort to improve your situation, then yes, the support would end. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with my mother alternating between reluctant engagement and passive-aggressive comments, and my father trying to mediate while expressing his own concerns and questions. We discussed specific budget items, potential job opportunities, and the painful topic of what might happen if they couldn't afford to keep their current home. Throughout the discussion, I maintained a calm, business-like demeanor, even when my mother tried to push emotional buttons with comments like, "I never thought my own daughter would treat me this way," or, "After all we've done for you." Each time, I gently redirected the conversation back to practical matters, refusing to be drawn into the emotional manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years. By the end of the meeting, we had reached a tentative agreement. I would provide a specific amount each month for the next 6 months, directly paying the mortgage company rather than giving the money to my parents. They would commit to following a budget, attending financial counseling sessions, and actively seeking better employment. We would meet monthly to review progress and address any issues that arose. The agreement wasn't perfect, and I had no illusions that my mother's resistance was fully overcome. But it was a starting point, a framework for a healthier relationship that respected both my boundaries and their needs. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, my father surprised me by pulling me into a hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not just for the financial help, but for forcing us to face reality. It's long overdue." My mother's goodbye was more reserved, a stiff nod and a terse, "We'll be in touch about the counseling appointments." But even that represented progress from the shouting and accusations of our previous interactions. Walking to my car after they left, I felt a complex mix of emotions, hope that this new approach might lead to genuine change, anxiety about whether the boundaries would hold, and a profound sense of relief that I had finally found the courage to address the dysfunction that had defined our relationship for too long. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were moving in the right direction. 6 months passed more quickly than I could have imagined. The transition period we had agreed upon had its ups and downs, moments of progress interspersed with setbacks and resistance. But overall, the change in our family dynamic was remarkable, if not always smooth or linear. The financial counseling sessions proved to be a turning point, particularly for my mother. Facing an objective third party who clearly outlined the unsustainability of their previous lifestyle seemed to break through her defenses in a way that my explanations never could. The counselor helped them create a realistic budget based on their actual income, with clear categories for necessary expenses, debt repayment savings, and discretionary spending. To my surprise, my mother found a part-time job at a boutique clothing store within the first month of our agreement. She had always had an eye for fashion, and the employee discount satisfied her desire for nice clothes, while the income helped ease their financial strain. More significantly, the job gave her a sense of purpose and identity outside of being a mother and homemaker roles that had diminished as I grew up and became independent. My father, with the help of a job placement service I had connected him with, secured a position as an inventory manager at a warehouse. The pay was better than his security guard job, the hours were more reasonable, and the work was less physically demanding. He seemed genuinely happier coming home with stories about his day, rather than the exhausted silence that had characterized his previous employment. Our monthly review meetings evolved from tense negotiations to more collaborative discussions. I still maintained firm boundaries, insisting on seeing bank statements and bills to ensure the mortgage was being paid and the budget followed. But as trust rebuilt slowly, these meetings became less adversarial and more focused on problem solving and planning for the future. The family therapy sessions were more challenging. My mother initially approached them with resistance, viewing the therapist as an ally of mine rather than a neutral facilitator. But over time, even she couldn't deny the benefit of having a safe space to discuss the resentments and expectations that had poisoned our relationship. In one particularly breakthrough session, my mother tearfully acknowledged that her anger toward me had been rooted in her own sense of failure and dependency. "I was supposed to take care of you," she admitted. "Not the other way around. Every time you paid a bill or bought groceries, it reminded me that I had failed as a mother." This admission opened the door to a more compassionate understanding of her behavior, though it didn't excuse the hurtful ways she had expressed that insecurity. For my part, I was able to express how her criticism and lack of appreciation had made me feel unvalued and used despite my best intentions to help. The therapist helped us establish healthier communication patterns, teaching my mother to express her insecurities directly, rather than through criticism, and helping me set boundaries without guilt or defensiveness. My father, who had always avoided conflict by remaining silent, learned to voice his opinions and mediate between us more effectively. By the end of the 6-month transition period, my parents were managing most of their own expenses. The mortgage had been refinanced to a more manageable payment, which they could cover with their combined incomes. They had built a small emergency fund enough to handle minor unexpected expenses without falling into crisis. And perhaps most importantly, they had developed financial habits that were sustainable, rather than dependent on external support. I had gradually reduced my financial contribution, first paying only a portion of the mortgage, then shifting to helping with specific bills, and finally transitioning to occasional assistance with unexpected expenses rather than regular monthly support. Each reduction was discussed in advance and implemented only when it was clear they could manage the change. Our relationship had transformed as well. We still had disagreements, of course, but they were no longer characterized by the toxic pattern of criticism, guilt, and enabling that had defined our interactions for years. I visited for dinner once a week, a choice rather than an obligation, and found that I actually enjoyed these visits now that they weren't shadowed by financial tension. My mother had begun to show genuine interest in my life and career, asking about my projects at work, and even offering occasional compliments on my achievements. My father and I had developed a habit of taking walks together after dinner conversations that allowed us to rebuild the connection that had been overshadowed by financial concerns for so long. As for me, the changes in my personal life were equally profound. Free from the financial burden and emotional drain of supporting my parents, I had thrived both professionally and personally. I had received a promotion at work partly due to my ability to focus fully on my career, without constant family distractions. I had expanded my social circle, reconnecting with old friends, and making new ones through activities I had previously had no time for. I had even started dating someone, a kind and understanding man, who listened with empathy when I explained the complicated history with my family. The relationship was still new, but it represented a part of life I had put on hold for too long. Perhaps, most significantly, I had begun building my own financial security. I had established an emergency fund, started contributing the maximum to my retirement accounts, and was even saving for a down payment on a condo. For the first time, I was investing in my future, rather than constantly bailing out the past. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. My mother occasionally made comments that hinted at entitlement or expectation, and I sometimes felt twinges of guilt when I spent money on myself, rather than offering it to them. But these moments became less frequent and less powerful as our new, healthier dynamic strengthened. Looking back on that night, when my mother had shouted, "You're ungrateful, get out and never come back," I could now see it as a painful but necessary breaking point. Sometimes relationships need to fracture completely before they can be rebuilt on a stronger foundation. The temporary pain of confrontation had led to lasting healing for our entire family. I had learned that true love sometimes means setting firm boundaries, that helping doesn't always mean giving people what they ask for, and that enabling behavior ultimately hurts both the enabler and the enabled. These were difficult lessons learned through tears and confrontation, but they had transformed not just my relationship with my parents, but my understanding of myself. The text message that had once filled me with indignation, "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" now seemed like a relic from a different life, a life where I had allowed myself to be defined by others' expectations rather than my own needs and boundaries. The journey of reclaiming my independence while maintaining a loving but bounded relationship with my family continues each day. It isn't always perfect, but it is authentic and mutually respectful in a way our previous dynamic never was. And for that painful but necessary transformation, I am genuinely grateful. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? How did you handle the guilt and pressure to continue enabling unhealthy patterns? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being sometimes. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself.